Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about SETI, and we're going to talk about METI, and we're going to talk about who has the right to speak for the Dungeons and Dragons community. All right, let's get into this. All right, so I was listening to Bo of the Fifth Column. He has a fantastic channel. You can go check him out. And he was talking about SETI and METI, and the reason why was there's a country that is currently getting into METI. Let me define these terms. SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and what it is it's a group of humans, a global group of humans, who listen for messages received from extraterrestrial sources, from aliens, who listen to see if aliens are sending us a message, right? But so far, SETI has failed. It has never found a single message sent from an extraterrestrial source, okay? Not one that the scientific community agrees upon, all right? Next is METI. That's when you message extraterrestrial intelligence. That means you send a signal out to be heard by extraterrestrial intelligence, by aliens, right? And here's the issue. So one, if you've read the Liu Cixin's wrote a fantastic fiction novel about this called The Three Body Problem, it's really the best. It's the best book on this subject, right? Because it just looks at it in very high detail and talks about what it means to actually what it says specifically is that METI is outrageously dangerous, and explains that when countries send messages into space to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, that what this really is this would be like pouring deer blood over yourself, walking into the forest at night, into a wolf-inhabited area, and shouting, right? Like, it's a bad idea, right? And the idea is that everybody's like, oh, first contact's going to be great. We're going to talk to each other. We're going to figure out how to talk to each other. Excuse me, and it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows, and people are like, no, man, like, we could definitely run up to, there's a distinct possibility that the extraterrestrial intelligence we find would be wicked dangerous, right? Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you read his book, you're like, oh yeah, this might not work out well. So what we're talking about today is not the danger of METI. What we're talking about is when one nation says, hey, we're going to METI, we're going to message extraterrestrial intelligence, they are speaking for Earth, right? They're like, hey, we're speaking, and most countries that do this, they're saying, hey, we the people of Earth. They don't go like, hey, us in Canada, they like, and you are making a decision for all Earthlings. You're not exposing the location of Canada, you're exposing location of Earth, right? So you're speaking for Earth. Which brings up the question, who has the right to speak for Dungeons and Dragons, right? So right now we have a D&D community, right? And that, in my humble opinion, that D&D community is not controlled by the owners of Dungeons and Dragons. Anybody who wants to like Dungeons and Dragons, anybody who wants to attach themselves to Dungeons and Dragons as a fan can do so, and no one can stop them, right? And then when they go onto sites like YouTube, and they start squawking their opinions on YouTube and saying, I of the D&D community think this, and I of the D&D community think that, right? They are speaking for the D&D community, right? Same thing, same METI subject, and there are a lot of people that speak for the D&D community and try to claim that authority within their commentary, all right? So here's the question, who has the right to do that? First of all, trust and believe, anybody has the ability. Nobody can really stop anybody from claiming that they're speaking for the D&D community. That's not even possible right now. Just like it's not possible to shut down a nation and say, stop METIing, right? You can't stop people from going on any social media site and saying, I'm speaking for the D&D community, right? So who actually has the right to speak for the D&D community? Well, right now, first of all, this is essentially academic because we can say it, right, but people don't have to follow it. But I think it's okay. I think it's very smart to acknowledge and set the stakes in the ground and say, this is the group that has the right to speak for the D&D community in my humble opinion. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you who should and who should not, right? Speak for the D&D community, because I think some people should and I think some people should not, all right? So who should speak for the D&D community and who should not speak for the D&D community? Well, basically, I think you should be, you do have the right to speak for the D&D community if you meet the following criteria. All right? First, criteria 1, you have goodwill for D&D now, the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons. If you're a D&D was fan, you don't have the right to speak for the D&D community, because you don't even know what's happening in D&D now, because you don't read the content and you don't really know what's occurring on the scene now for Dungeons and Dragons. So if you're D&D was, you're out. You do not have the right to speak for the D&D community, in my humble opinion. Right? You should not. Right now, first of all, no one can stop you, and I don't think anybody should stop you, but you should know that if you're D&D was, you should not be speaking for the D&D community, because you quite literally do not know what you're talking about. You don't know what D&D now is, right? You know what D&D was, right? But that's not enough to speak for the community, right? So you have to have goodwill for D&D now, the current edition. The current edition right now is 5e. When it's 6e, you have to have some goodwill for that, right? So if I have goodwill for D&D 5e. If I come to 6e and I'm like, I hate this, I should no longer be able to speak for I no longer have the right, in my own humble opinion, to speak for the D&D community, right? You should be a dungeon master. Being a player is not enough to speak for the D&D community. The engagement's so low, and there's such a weak body of knowledge, and there's such a weak discipline there right now that no player, in my opinion, even if they're a 5e, if you've never dungeon mastered, you should not speak for the D&D community. You just don't know enough about D&D, and your commitment is too low, right? In my humble opinion, you need to have a dozen sessions minimum under your belt to speak for the D&D community. Otherwise, you just don't have enough experience to speak for the D&D community. Last, you need to have read current edition, right, which right now is 5e, DMG, PHB, Monster Manual, cover to cover, one setting book, take your pick, Eberron, Explorer's Guide to Wild Mount, Ravnica, whatever you want, right, and one adventure. Take your pick, Curse of Strahd, Storm King's Thunder, Call of the Netherdeep, whatever you want. You have to have read PHB, DMG, MM, one source book, one setting book. That's it. Those are the qualifications. If you meet those qualifications, you should have the right, in my humble opinion, to speak for the D&D community. If you miss even one of those, keep your trap shut. You should not be speaking for the D&D community, in my humble opinion. What do you think? What do you think qualifies someone to speak for the Dungeons & Dragons community? I'd love to hear your list. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.